Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. I'm Nikhil, Raghuveera, CEO and co-founder of Heimdall Labs, where we're building a modular and decentralized compliance layer. So blockchains have a compliance problem. Malicious actors interact directly with protocol smart contracts to move their assets. And so this came up recently with Tornado Cash, but it's been the case for a long time, especially as it relates to hackers of various protocols across the industry throughout our entire time. And so what we're doing is we're actually looking to solve that. Heimdall is a modular protocol for projects to build compliant smart contract solutions. And so what this really involves is the ability for projects to build project-specific compliant products that aren't limited to only KYC. And really what we're doing here is we're essentially aggregating on-chain and off-chain data, such as flow of funds data, KYC, geolocation, reputation systems, the list goes on and on. But essentially we're able to aggregate all these different things that projects can select and choose from. And our vision here really is creating community-owned standards for permissioning and compliance. When we think of kind of compliance so far, it's been a very top-down kind of government approach, which is KYC or blockchain analytics providers. But instead what we're doing is the design so that projects can really select their own compliance structures. And this is really important when we think about unlocking growth, both for projects that are working with enterprise partners, as well as working on building more trust by crypto native users and retail users. So examples can be token bridges, creating compliant token bridges such that without even KYC, you're able to block sanctioned assets from flowing through. Or a DeFi protocol, working with an institutional capital provider who doesn't want their assets to be commingled with high-risk sanctioned assets. And then, of course, from a retail standpoint, how can you increase trust by retail users, especially as it relates to hackers? Illicit finance for us is only actually the beginning in preventing that. Our vision actually is really just creating a generalizable permissioning system such that you're able to incorporate all types of reputation and credential-based systems, geolocation, as well as the ability for users and LPs to really determine the compliant pathways that they want to take when they're interacting with any protocol. We've been working with an initial set of partners to really unlock the market. These partners are interested in building out structures that aren't limited to KYC, but go well beyond that. So our team has a really strong background in this. I've been at the Sawa Foundation for over 2 years as head of strategy and innovation. I also have a strong background in digital asset policy. My co-founder, Jesse, was an engineer at C Labs. He worked on special projects and major launches, and was a founding engineer at the on and off-ramp provider, Ponto, where he built KYC structures there. And so our asks are two. One is, if you're a project that's looking for compliance or permissioning designs that aren't limited to KYC or go beyond, we'd love to work with you.
Great. Thanks, Nikhil. That was great. For those of you raising your hands, just ask your questions directly in the Q&A section at the bottom of Zoom, and I can see it. But first question, what do you think are the biggest advantages of Heimdall compared to incumbents like Chainalysis?
So incumbents and blockchain analytics providers like Chainalysis are after the fact. You have the way I or a compliance team might use a Chainalysis or any project, the assets have already flown through. So you'll say, hey, these assets have come through, we see it, now we can't really do anything about it, which is precisely what a group like Tornado Cash had, which was, you can see the assets coming through, but you can't do anything else beforehand. In our case, what we're doing is it's actually a proactive structure such that any project can say, we actually don't even want these assets coming in. How do we prevent or mitigate that? In our case, we're also not a competitor to Chainalysis or TRM or Elliptic or any of those providers. We're actually a complement to them because we can also link to their data via an API or zero knowledge proof, such that any project can use their data from a proactive standpoint.
You mentioned some great early partners. In your opinion, which vertical or category yields the most demand for a product like Heimdall today?
The highest demand we've seen so far are ones that are working on larger institutional or enterprise use cases. And so this could be projects that are working from a more infra level like Axelar, but it could also be DApp level applications, such as real world asset groups as well. It really just comes down to, for them, it's having, for the initial go-to-market for us, is projects that are like, hey, we need some type of compliance structures that aren't just KYC, or don't involve KYC at all, or might involve multiple KYC providers. And in that case, that's really where we're seeing the most interest and the most opportunity. And also the most kind of need when we're looking at unlocking growth for the market.
Makes sense. Will Price asks, for the funds originating from a bridge hack example, how do you vet an address for flow of funds, given that it might have only been funded the block before? Does that have to be a two-step process of request/approval?
So in the case of a hacked asset, what we're doing is we're not necessarily even creating that list of, what is the address that has received those hacked assets. Instead, it's really up to the project, or you can use different data providers that identify hacks really quickly. What we're doing in that case is we're identifying that the origination of that address, and then we're able to follow the flow of funds. So let's say there's a hacker who has been identified to have hacked a protocol. We know that they're now holding, let's say, ETH that they stole. From the ETH that they've stolen, we'll then be able to follow this flow of funds. So if they're like, hey, I'm trying to hop this across multiple different wallets to make it seem like it's not really me, we're essentially able to follow those flow of funds. So that way, when a project says, we don't want these assets coming in at all, or we don't want to interact with them, or we don't want them to be bridged off to another chain to be laundered, we're following those flow of funds and saying, hey, you as a protocol, as a token bridge, for example, set a policy that you don't want these going through. And we're able to essentially follow through with that.
Govind Narayan is asking, could you give us a few illustrative examples of how you'd expect customers to go above and beyond KYC/AML regulations or tackle them in different ways?
Yeah, so the question I just want to make sure is that it's going beyond kind of government compliance, right? So what do we really think beyond that? So I think the first one is we just talked about hacks. Quite frankly, governments at the end of the day, when we think about AML, a hack doesn't fall necessarily under an AML standpoint, especially when it comes to sanctioned users. That's something that we as an ecosystem can actually determine. That's one example. But other ones too are if we start thinking about kind of on-chain reputation systems, identity, credit scores even, that's something that we're able to use, we're able to integrate in any way, shape, and form. So, if we start thinking about real world lending and the ability of thinking about the flow of funds as it relates to credit scores, that's something that we can also essentially utilize the Heimdall network for. But then it goes beyond that. I think there's a world in which, for gaming projects even, again, you have social identity, social reputation. And so again, it can be used for almost any instance that involves some type of identity or some type of identity or anything that kind of matches between a person and assets and external data.
We have time for one more question. It's, how does the prevention actually work? Can it wrap around an existing protocol, or does it need to be built in from the ground up alongside protocol development?
So the implementation involves essentially a few lines of additional code and an update to the smart contract. So an update to the smart contract that's relevant for the actual kind of permissioning or compliance or whatever structure that might be. It requires a minor update to that. Should be something that we've seen to be a pretty low lift. Takes approximately less than 1 day for a senior engineer. But yeah, it's essentially implementing that, and then of course putting in place your on-chain compliance policy that you might want to set. But it does, of course, require a bit of an update to your smart contract.
Great, thanks so much, Nikhil.